Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is titled Research Integrity by Design, Leveraging Structure and Technology for Publishing Workflows. My name is Marianne Kalahana, and I'm the VP of Marketing here at Data Conversion Laboratory. Before we begin, I do want to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available in the on-demand section of our website at dataconversionlaboratory.com. We will absolutely save time at the end of our conversation today to answer any questions you have. So please feel free to submit questions via the GoToWebinar control panel. And you can do that as they come to mind. I'm really excited to introduce today's panelists to everyone. We have Mark Gross, who is president and founder of DCL. Mark is an industry leader in structuring content and digitization best practices and directs the development of DCL's extensive list of services and solutions. We also have Madalena Popp. Madalena joins us today from Moressier, where she serves as Research Integrity Team Lead. She leads Moressier's product team toward building a tech stack that integrates research integrity checks that supports authors, reviewers, and publishers at every step of the publication workflow. And finally, we have Adrian Stanley. Adrian has been intricately involved in many tech initiatives across the ecosystem, and today wears his hat as a partner with Clear Skies. You probably remember Adrian as a past president of the Society for Scholarly Publishing, and welcome everyone. So before we jump into the conversation, I'd like to very quickly share a little bit of background on DCL. We've been in business for more than 40 years and are US based. Our focus is on resolving problems related to content formats and metadata. DCL's core mission is transforming content and data into structured formats. We believe that well-structured content is fundamental to fostering innovation. Today, people know DCL as the leading provider of XML conversion services, but Mark Gross started the business in 1981, long before markup languages were a thing. Today, DCL boasts more than 10,000 projects in 50 countries. And what really sets us apart is quality. We work on complex content and data challenges when it has to be right. And listed here are just a few clients representing a broad range of industries in which we work. Now I'm going to turn it over to Madalena and have her share a little bit about Moressier.
Thank you, Marianne. It is a pleasure to be here. I'm Madalena Popp. I am part of the research integrity team here at Moressier. Our team manages Moressier's Integrity Manager, a service supporting publishers with the assessment of quality and integrity of research to be published or that has already been published. A few words about Moressier. Moressier provides societies and publishers with integrity-protected workflows. This is in line with our vision of a world in which all scientific outputs are traceable and trustworthy. Moressier's initial focus was digitizing conferences in order to support early stage research, and this nicely evolved into a workflow platform, and now we are committed to defending publishing programs against fraud and research misconduct with our integrity protected workflows.
Adrian, can you tell us a little bit about the work you're currently doing with Paper Mill Alarm?
Yes. So the Paper Mill Alarm, founded by Adam Day, was actually the first sort of commercial research integrity fraud detection tool that was on the market. Integrated very early with places like the STM Integrity Hub. But the Paper Mill Alarm really takes a sort of number of signals and indicators from author history, kind of citations, articles, templates, and has built this sort of AI-based machine learning capacity and analyzed basically all of the research literature. So we've, done some studies and tests on retracted papers and saw that it delivers a simple red, green, or orange alert. And say, for example, on the known Hindawi retractions of over 12,000 articles, we detected over 98.8% signals in that work. So we work together. We do integrate with the good people at Maurice too, along with a number of the partners, Aries, Cryodocs. So it's an easy way to sort of fit these alerts into someone's sort of systems. I would say there's sort of two use cases and angles. There's one of working with the editorial teams, of signaling new manuscripts and if there's alerts on those and sharing details why, which I find publishers feel very important, but also sort of historically we've a whole view of the whole published content, and a number of publishers either want to know if there's a level of exposure or to go back and do kind of investigations on research misconduct. So that's that. But part of this discussion with Mark, I will be kind of wearing multiple hats. I was a publisher, was a technology person. I support other companies, but I think this is a great discussion. So thanks for inviting me along. Thanks.
Well, thanks for joining us. All right, I'm gonna turn the conversation over to you, Mark.
Okay.
Take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Marianne, and thank also Madalena and Adrian for joining us on this session. Before we start about this concept of integrity issues are not new. Just to set the sort of level set, how do you define a paper mill? What is a paper mill? Because that's sort of like people throw the term around pretty loosely, I think. Adrian.
That's to me, yeah. I mean, the sort of broad discussion around that is research misconduct, and there are sort of groups that work at scale to help authors publish articles, and there are sort of people that sell authorship for sales. It's a broad-ranging topic, but there are a number of signals, a number of activities, a number of sleuths and people out there sort of working to identify kind of either fake science or made up science. So it's a good question, but I wouldn't say one of the things we distinguish paper mill alarms isn't checking for things like AI generated text as such. It's really looking for signals about the researchers, the research that's published. The paper mills have a business of selling authorships and selling research work. So citing their own work, improving citations. So I hope that helps sort of define.
Okay, well, I guess so. A paper mill, by that definition, is always fraudulent, right? If it's fraudulent, it becomes a sort of its ident. So there probably are businesses that do stuff like that are not fraudulent. We don't call them paper mills. We call them publishing support services or something, right? So okay, so I just wanted to get that. So anyway, this idea of this is just it really came on my radar only a few years ago, of this concept that research integrity has become like an alarming issue. It's suddenly, and it's like 3 years ago or so. I mean, like in the middle of COVID or something like that, it suddenly became a topic at every conference I was at. What is it? But it's not new. I mean, Marianne dug up this article from 1964 in the New York Times, talking about the integrity of science. But they were few and far between. It's only in the last few years that it's hit the mainstream. What's the cause of that? What has changed in the last few years that suddenly it's an issue? I don't know, Madeline, you want to take a first shot at that, or?
Sure. This is Mark. This is actually one of my favorite topics, and this is exactly because of the increased attention that this is been getting in the past few years, especially outside of the research communities, because this has become a public concern, the research integrity problem. And indeed, we've heard a lot of about research integrity in the past 2-3 years, but we know that issues like plagiarism, for example, are definitely not new. We hear about plagiarizing in year 80. We hear about legal framework around plagiarism being set around the 1600s or the 1700s. So this is not a new problem. It's the same with paper mill. I bumped into an article a few weeks back that was talking about paper mills, and that was dated 2013. So that's 11 years ago. And even though we've heard about this a lot in the past few years, this is not new. And I think that I kind of see two reasons for which now this is more popular, a hotter topic. First of all, the increased attention kind of feels natural considering the rapid development of technology. On one hand, this makes it easier to commit fraud. So we have access to research. We can just copy paste text. We can run that text through tools that can rephrase it, that can replace words with synonyms and create those so-called tortured phrases, right? And it's easy to do that. It's also easy to get in touch with paper mills, with these organizations that sell authorship slots to authors. They promote themselves in social networks. You can just run a Google search and you can identify these services. So it's easy to commit fraud. On the other hand, the rapid development of technology also allows us to identify these issues easier. So if years ago it was really difficult to identify that some text was plagiarized, now you have technology that can process information at scale, and we can actually identify these papers and this kind of research easier.
Okay. And AJ, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, yeah. I think one point that's known, and Madeleine is right, that the advances in technology, I would just say, technology can give a lot of signals and indicators and highlight. If you've got 100,000 papers, you may only need to look at 100 of those carefully, but you do need a human also to look into the details. And I see a kind of growth of, research integrity departments, skill shifts of being able to analyze these signals and really identify, is this a paper we should reject? Is it something just needs a very good peer review? I think there's a number of sort of gray lines. If an article cites one retracted reference against if it cites, 10, that's a different level of signal. But you need humans to be able to understand that sort of variance. And I know Marissa has been doing a great job to really develop all these checks and put research integrity at the forefront. But those are tools and systems to help people do their job in a better way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to get back. Yeah, we'll get back to that, I think, in a little while. But let's talk about what kind of misconduct you've been seeing. And I know the retraction watch is out there, and a retraction is a big black mark, so that to any journal, right, and every author, and that's also become sort of one of those areas that gets disputed. Should have been retracted, all those kind of things. But let's see, what are the pieces? And I see we're on a slide. We have a whole bunch of them. Can we talk about which of these things are more important, less important? Which things are happening all the time? I suspect you already mentioned plagiarism has always been around, going back centuries and centuries, probably going millennia, right? So I mean, but we didn't call them plagiarism then. I guess we call them something else. But do you want to talk about how these different how they manifest themselves And AJ, you talk about signals. I mean, what do you mean? What kind of signals do you get from these kind of these forms of misconduct?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I would just say, you know, while retractions have a negative connotation, I do think it can also be highlighted, show that publishers have got good practices in place. Not every retraction is for a fraudulent reason. They could have been a genuine mistake that affected the science. So I think we have to be careful just how we view retractions. You know, in some cases, it's better to ensure that the sort of that version of record is either updated or checked. I would just say, sort of maybe going back to some of the reasons we see or understand why sort of paper mills have really kind of grown and been highlighted is, you know, just take, for example, a doctor in China that's having to work, you know, 14, 15, 16 hours a day looking after patients, but still has a need within the system, or used to have certainly, to publish a certain number of articles. So when a service comes and said, I can help you, you know, tick a box that you publish this, you know, some of their focus is doing the work, but to get their academic, you know, keep their credits. The other areas we've seen are things like if someone needs a paper in a certain career area, whether it be machine learning or sustainability, or a way that they can help them get promotion, and they may not have done as much of that research, but they want a shortcut to there. Now that, you know, the crazy thing is that these articles are there as a version of record and can be analyzed and found later, right? So I think you have to be careful. And then one last point, the whole sort of research misconduct outside of scholarly publishing. There was a presenter at the STM meeting in Washington, DC in April, basically said that's a $21 million business when you put all the kind of academic credits, career progression, you know. So I think even that's a bigger issue of shortcutting a way to get to where maybe you want to be as a career. But I think these researchers are making a decision that, you know, ultimately is not the right one, right? And the ways that this can be detected, that there are consequences. But Madalena, maybe you want to add something more to that at this point.
You have some thoughts on that? I'm sure you do.
I do, Mark, to your question earlier, which of these signals are more important than others? I think it's very hard to say that plagiarism is worse than peer review manipulation, or than data manipulation, or I think that what is important is to be able to detect all of these signals and to analyze all the signals in their in the submission context or across the submissions. So it's not one single signal or one single check that would qualify the quality of the submission of the research. Is looking at all these aspects together in order to make the decision: is this good quality? Do I have enough proof, enough evidence to reject something or to retract something? And in terms of the ways of misconduct, I think there are so many creative ways of of doing this. So we see data manipulation and image manipulation, which is things that have been talked about for long. Plagiarism as well, text and image, and this varies from like simple copy pasting someone else's writing, but also that processing through additional tools to rephrase, or even copying someone's text in a different language, then translating it to English, which makes it even more difficult to detect as plagiarism. So there's also misconduct related to authorship. We talked about paper mills selling authorship slots, right, to authors, but there's things like adding someone as an author to a paper they've never contributed to because they are a well-established researcher in the field, and you think that this increases your chances to get published. Retraction Watch actually has some really nice stories. Nice, it's not nice. some stories around researchers who found themselves authoring papers around research they never had anything to do with. So imagine finding that out in any context, but imagine how problematic that is when you find that out in the context of that paper being flagged for misconduct, and you're one of the authors and you had nothing to do with it. Another way of authorship misconduct is authors changing contributions to bypass, for example, open access fees. Because you are from a country that benefits from discount, so I'm adding you as the main contributor to this article so I can publish for free. This is also misconduct, right? There's citation manipulation, there's peer review manipulation.
Getting a discount you're not entitled to, right? So.
Exactly. So there's all these creative ways of misconduct, and the question for us then becomes, how do we combat this? What do we do? What can we do to make this better? And I think there are a few things we can look at. First of all, we should look at how we prevent misconduct in the first place, and how do we make it hard for these bad actors to get to us in the first place. And I think this is where we start talking about this research integrity by design. How do we prevent these bad actors reaching us in the first place? Then we're not going to stop them completely, that's for sure. But
right.
if they bypass our vetting processes, how do we enable, how do we run as many checks as possible, and how do we flag for as many issues as possible? And this not only at the level of a single manuscript, but across publications, because there's misconduct that is not necessarily obvious in the context of a single manuscript. You have to look across publications in order to identify these types of misconduct.
Across multiple publications, how do you do that? I mean, everything the guy's authored, you mean? So that's like, so it's really a collection of authorship kind of things. Let me just go back to of the things we talked. Some of them are, like you said, mechanically viable, right? Plagiarism you can figure out, even if so the languages, there's the complications. But like the worst ones of these, in my mind, is fabrication and falsification of that's. How do you find that?
Well, it depends on the things that are falsified, right? So for image manipulation, for example, we have scientific sleuths who actually provide trainings on how you can identify that an image has been manipulated. And there are tools that identify that an image has been spliced, or something in the image was erased, or
right.
that the image was tampered with. With data, I think it's more difficult.
Yeah.
And Adrian can talk to that. Yeah.
It looks like he's waiting to say something.
Well, I was going to say, one of the use cases we see when there isn't a flag and alert is really just the publisher editorial office ensuring they send it to good, trusted peer reviewers they know. Peer review still works. It's still a great process. So using these signals to just perhaps sort of triage the manuscripts. But I would add one point, Mark, to your earlier comment, that I think there's been a lot of great work being done around, detecting and highlighting research fraud and ways. And one of the ways is things like where there's duplicate submissions, where a paper mill will submit to multiple journals, and through different systems, and certainly STM and Clear Skies, you can see that, and there's a really good indicator. You know, there is an argument then when you notice that you think it is a paper mill submission, and you have a pretty strong argument that maybe you don't just reject it automatically. Maybe it goes into a holding area somewhere, because you know the paper mills will just sort of resubmit till they find the sort of right journal. So that's that. But one just additional kind of point that I think is really interesting that I'm seeing coming forward now is also signals where people have done good research, where they've been able to share the underlying data, the code, a protocol, maybe a preprint, maybe a presentation, sort of like honest signaling. So you can sometimes counterbalance or compare signals with what happens when you get a paper mill alert, but then did they actually do a lot of the good scientific practices that make that research reproducible and transparent? Because paper mills don't really want to go to that level of effort. So I think there's an interesting sort of dichotomy of where you can sort of also begin to focus on behavior that's positive and could be supported, as well as the sort of negative things.
Right. So I think that's a very interesting point. That okay. I mean, the rule, you know, it used to be who's the author made a very important piece of it, and the peer reviewers knew people. And I think took us to that slide before, which was also skipped over because I think we were running out of time on some of this stuff, but because it's such an interesting conversation. But part of it is just the sheer volume of material that's being published today. I mean, the Medline in 2023, is 1.25 million citations in 2023. So this is so much. I love the every 24.5 seconds you're getting a new paper out there, which is incredible. But it's also, there's so many authors now that there's no way that there's a personal touch anymore. And I think that's part of what it's probably seems very anonymous. Right. I mean, if you're in you know 50 years, and I don't even know what the numbers are. It's probably a chart that you know that goes like that. But 50 years ago, the number of papers coming out in any discipline was small enough that people knew each other. They knew it was going. So you're not going to cheat because you know it's going to come back to you. People knew you, and the peer reviewers knew everybody. Today, it seems very, very anonymous. So, and I think what you said about positive signaling is also very important. That comes down to people. But I just wanted like if you got a paper retracted, I think Adrian made a very good point. Retraction isn't always a bad thing. But if you get a paper retracted for a bad reason, like when you're 23 and now 10-15 years later you've turned a new leaf and you've been doing good science for 15 years, is there a process to improve your author integrity rating? I mean, is there?
Well, I think those are the really interesting kind of key editorial decisions that the publishers are having to make. If there is a signal, but it was from a while ago, but now they're doing good work, or maybe there's, you know, paper mills in between the kind of research they're doing. Like, I think there's going to be a sort of normalizing or discussion around those best practices of, you know, what would you do in that case if he's published 10 great articles but one bad one? Is that fair to say maybe I shouldn't publish the next one? Like, those are, I think, challenging questions that I suspect each publishing house may look at that differently, right?
And to the extent that you're putting metrics on all this stuff, and it's an automated process, people might get cut out without further review. It almost needs to be a forum to allow you to ask for a second chance, or to ask for a review, I guess, of a decision. But yeah, so one of the things we talked about, we talked about before, is about standards and metadata and structure and all those things. I mean, to the extent, you know, the rule of thumb, like in security, is don't let the bad actor in the first place, right? And so to the extent that you can find that, and you can find the bad actors, the bad actors that are repetitive bad actors, that's really the best way to keep bad science out of bad articles. And I guess putting the standards and metadata and earlier in the process probably helps a lot. And to what extent, I mean, I guess you're getting a lot of information right at the beginning of the process, Madalena. I mean, like, Adrian, I mean, you're getting probably information on authorship, I guess. What other kinds of things can you really are you really doing today?
It's not only authorship. I mean, authorship is part of it, definitely, but it's also the institutions for which those authors work, right? It's also their previous publication and their networks, their authorship networks, which are important, and their history of publications. So I think this is where metadata and standards and structure help, because in the context of the increased volumes that you were talking about earlier, Mark, assessing a submission is not an easy task for the editors. It's not an easy task for reviewers, and it requires effort. With these standards, you can automate part of the time-consuming tasks that an editor would have to take, or a reviewer, right? Because you're assessing the quality of the research, but as you said, you're also interested in who the author is. What is the institution they work for, especially in this context in which the reviewers don't know the authors anymore, or the publishers don't know the authors anymore. And having this metadata available and these standards and these persistent identifiers helps us automate some of these tasks. So take Ringgold, for example, the Ringgold Identified Database. You see an institution you've never seen before. Do you have to manually check if that institution is a genuine institution? Do you have to search in different sources to get this information? Maybe, if it's not already vetted by Ringgold, but if it's already vetted by Ringgold, you have some level of confidence that yes, this is a genuine institution, and this is all the information that we can provide you about this institution. Same for ORCID. ORCID has this amazing initiative where they partner up with institutions to verify the fact that someone is affiliated to that institution. So this saves you time to I don't know, maybe go to that institution's webpage, staff webpage, to see, is this person actually working there, or have this people actually publish this information. This is information that is already vetted, and providing it to the investigator in one place is essential for optimizing the assessment process.
Right.
And maybe just to add to Madalena's point about ORCID, Mark, if that's okay. You know, many journals, sort of their policies have been, you know, that the lead corresponding author should have an ORCID, but not necessarily all the other ORCIDs. The publisher I worked at, we did ensure every contributor had an ORCID, and as Madalena said, it's verified and it's there. That's a great way to just put a few standards and checks in, you know, update your submission forms and process. It may take the author a little more time sometimes, but knowing that, and so it really does say that we do need these cross sort of publisher initiatives with people like ORCID and other you know, PID vendors and things, and yeah.
Yeah, I'm surprised that I mean the percentage of authors that have ORCID IDs is still relatively low. It seems to me. I don't know. You're closer to it than I am, but like you said, the lead authors will have it, but a lot of times some of these articles have 100 authors on them. So I think it's an interesting bring of the author should take a little bit more trouble to get verified and be a trusted. In the 60s, you'd get onto an airplane and nobody was checking anything. I don't know if you remember those days. I remember Marine Terminal. I would go in basically in 3 minutes from cab to airplane, and I'd be flying to Washington. Today, there's none of this other stuff. But today you have to be like a verified traveler and all those things. So the idea of more of this verification kind of concept should be a regular thing. So it sounds like an ORCID idea that the facilities should have it. All those seems like a natural, but they're not all there. Just want to talk about one last thing, tying back to what what was the theme of our conversation there, of putting in structure throughout the article, and the idea of converting, of having a JATS article early on in the process, like even before peer review, and that probably wasn't feasible a few years ago, but it probably is today. I'm wondering, we do a lot of work for the U.S. Patent Office, and patents, when they were coming in, used to come in as PDF documents, and the patent examiners have to leaf through it. There was like no automation aids to any of that. Today, everything is turned into XML right at the beginning before the examiner ever gets it. So you can take advantage of all the automation. What do you see as the state of the art now in converting to JATS even before peer review? Is that happening at all? I mean, I think it needs some. We've been working on automated approaches to taking a Word article and turn it into XML, but it doesn't seem that many of the platforms are actually using that yet or doing that. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, my assessment is some of these different sort of AI-based technologies that run off, platforms like OpenAlex has a lot of data. Often they will do sort of some of the kind of automatic conversions and use tools. I know Grobit is one that gets used a bit to get the key parts of the manuscript kind of there, the reference, the title, the abstracts, the authors, the affiliations. Those are a lot of the key areas. Often, maybe you don't need as much of the full text, but I sense those systems, wouldn't do a great job if you were pushing that straight into a publishing workflow, but they're using XML as kind of like more the metadata standards to really highlight and tag and be consistently looking across the data and across all the publications. So that's my sense. I think it's good if the more and more publishers can have upfront XML workflows and work in structured formats. I think that's positive too.
Right. I mean, it's going to take time. Madalena, what are you seeing in the field?
Kind of the same thing that Adrian is seeing. I think that there are solutions that are extracting these key aspects of a manuscript. What we bumped into with these solutions is that they are very dependent on the format of the manuscript, because they are typically trained on certain formats. So this makes it difficult to extract. So absolutely implementing this early on in the process, it absolutely helps with automation and with keeping the metadata clean and so on.
Right, but what you're finding, because people have different formats, it's not easy to do. It's not easy to do. I mean, as technology develops, it will be. I mean, it's sort of. I mean, that's one area it seems that AI really can help, right? I mean, of taking apart formats and pulling it together. So if that was available, that might be helpful in the early evaluation of an article. I mean, Right. I mean, the earlier you could tell an article is suspect, the better it is. I mean, that's got to be the right. I mean, after you've gone through peer review, and then you find your signals, that's probably that's an expensive process. And getting peer reviewers, AJ, you mentioned how peer review is really important in all this, but I've heard that getting peer reviewers has become a real issue. Is that what you're seeing also?
I mean, certainly, you know, there's technologies that help match the article to people's research profiles, but you know, academics are overloaded, or it seems, certainly my experience of those examples of finding peer reviewers, but having good, you know, editorial board members that, you know, you can rely on and trust for certain papers who'll do the peer review, those sort of things can help. But yeah, matching the right content with the right people is another sort of area that I think is important too, right? And you know, trusted. We actually did a ranking when I was at JMIR, the founder there, of quality of peer reviews. So the editorial office somehow rated it, and the peer reviewers rated the article and gave us an assessment what they thought. And many of those articles ended up getting a lot more higher citations and you know, altmetric scores and things like that. So I think there are systems that help give peer reviewers reward, whether they're sort of credits you can offset for publications or copies of the journals. You know, so I think looking after your peer reviewers is a good sort of step that's important too. You know,
Right.
thanking them with a, you know, a page of thanks at the end of your issue is something simple you could do, but yeah.
Right. So is that, I mean, are people doing that? Is that helping? I mean,
It certainly was at the publishing organization I worked at.
right. I guess it depends on what field you're in. I mean, some fields there's probably plenty of people. In some fields, I think you mentioned the author and 3 other people are the only people in the world qualified to review it. So,
Yeah.
sometimes it's not 3 other people. So that's probably an area that you can't do very much in. Any other thoughts on what, you know, maybe a quick statement and closing thoughts on what you think we are, where we are, and what's going to happen? I mean, Madeline, you want to go first? Or?
Sure. So returning to the topic of research integrity by design, I would kind of like to highlight the importance of keeping integrity in mind at every step of the publication process, and not only the publication process, at every step of the research process. So from the moment you're documenting your research and conducting the research, and beyond the publication process, when this research becomes groundwork for new research. And today we focused a lot on the publication process, on the publishers, but the publishers are not the only party involved in this. There are different actors involved in the process. There's the researchers, there's the funders, there's the regulators, there's the institutions. So it kind of takes effort from all of these actors to increase the quality of research at every step of
Right.
the research.
Well, very good points. Adrian, your final
Yeah,
thoughts?
one thing we didn't touch on, you know, I do think, and looking at examples from, say, the banking industry, where obviously there's a lot of fraudulent activity that needs to be measured and monitored, and they have systems for credit scores and all sorts of things like that. You know, there are still sort of regulations, things like GDPR, where it is hard to share data about people across publishers. So having systems that can sort of anonymize and centralize and take the big picture view, but yet be careful how they share that data across publishers. You can have a flag, but not necessarily say this paper from this journal and this publisher was bad, you know, and they're trying to publish in your article. So I think some of the regulations need to be thought of, and that, you know, in an ideal world, there was a discussion in Frankfurt, right? If you really wanted to stop paper mills, you know, identifying these bad actors as submitting to many journals, but it does seem like there are some sort of legal restrictions in some areas about that, and you have to be very careful with accusations and research misconduct, right? It does take time for institutions and publishers to really investigate. So putting up the kind of stops and checks at the beginning, I think, is one way to avoid yourself getting into those bigger, more costly operations down the line. You know, I think I read somewhere a retraction and research investigation can cost somewhere like $700,000 or something. It's kind of crazy if you get all the people in a room and all the meetings and the time to investigate. So I think putting checks in earlier is a sound movement, but as an industry, I think we have to keep working together and finding solutions to sort of tackle this, because I don't think it's going to go away. There's always going to be incentives for someone to cheat.
Yeah, but I'm not sure what regulation. I mean, in the banking industry, you have some regulators with some pretty strong hammer. I mean, a threat of a $5 billion fine is very effective in banks, but in the publishing industry, I don't think we have something like that other than the good name, right, and threat of retraction. So, it's sort of self-policing rather than, right?
Well, it is, but perhaps I know there's been sort of a couple of calls and posts around, you know, where should institutions kind of be part of this, and perhaps a little earlier upstream, and not always just be on the publisher to be the publishers are the gatekeepers of the content and the quality, but at some point I think institutions perhaps need to play a bigger role too.
Right. That's they don't want to. Oh, Marianne's here. I mean, they don't want to turn off their authors either, right? There's also the competition of authors, so for authors. So, Marianne, you, I guess it's question time.
It's question time. We have a few questions coming in, so want to take these final minutes to address those. What incentives can publishers offer authors to offset the additional trouble of navigating technological guardrails? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think you know, an author would be pleased to know that these checks are happening, so that the journal and the publication of choice, right, is, you know, is doing things to only publish the best work, and but using technology and people that it's sort of best. So I think it's sort of I'm not sure it's actually that much of a issue for the authors. It's more the editorial people, right, who are, you know, finding and assessing and doing the work, and then the author gets the decision. So I don't know, but Madalena may add more to that. Maybe there's more context to the question.
I would also add to that we are now in this context in which we have to process a lot of research. So this is a great opportunity for us to rethink our current processes and try to increase the efficiency of these processes. Because automation, we talked about automation here in the context of the publisher needs, but there's room for optimizing the process through which the authors go when submitting something. So making it simple for the authors, and especially for the good examples that Adrian was talking about. You don't want to put burden on those people just because there are a few bad actors who are trying to bypass the systems, right, and the checks in place. You want to make it easy for these people to submit their research, and there is a lot of room for optimization for authors as well, while also checking for integrity and making sure that the publishers have the right information to make their decision, of course.
Right. The conversation today talked a lot about technology, tools that are in use. But then, Adrian, you mentioned, you know, bringing humans in the loop. So there's this distribution of technology and human intervention. What are you seeing in terms of publisher staffing? Are they creating research integrity staff or research integrity departments to keep pace with what's going on?
Yeah, Sabina Allen from Taylor Francis has presented at a couple of STM meetings, and I think she basically said something along the lines of, in 2019 they had 180 serious cases, not just plagiarism, authenticate. I think, don't quote me exactly on this, but the timeline was in a couple of years later they had 2,000 to 3,000, and then when she presented at the last STM meeting, 4,000 to 5,000 integrity cases that they need to look at, coordinate with authors, with institutions. But I think that's the historic part of that. I would say perhaps as the sort of checking part up front, a number of publishers are working with their kind of existing vendors and people to help triage, where you may have a group of people that can assess, is everything there in a manuscript? Are the figures there? Did the author send the supplemental data and things? So I think there are ways that people are integrating these in processes, but I still see that's perhaps evolving, and there are different ways people are kind of using these technologies. And I suspect it would be a really great meeting for us to have to really look at all the different ways people use technologies with people together, and normalizing some of the decisions that people have to make and how training is done. I think there's a huge opportunity there somewhere for someone.
All right, thank you. Another question, can we talk about humanities, misconduct or research integrity issues in humanities compared with STM? Are the same things going on? Are there different considerations? Any thoughts on that?
Madeleine,
I would say that we do have publishers working in STM that face different types of issues more than others. There's actually, I think we ran an analysis on the Retraction Watch database a few years ago, and there are different types of misconduct that are leading in the different domains, but these are not necessarily, I would not say we see a huge difference between the two sectors in types of misconduct.
Okay. And another question, the scholarly publishing in itself is an evolution of scientific ideas. We know that science changes and evolves as we learn more and understand our world. So can you speak to using some of the tools and the technology to differentiate between true misconduct and what we're talking about with evolution of ideas? I think this circles back to what Adrian said about retractions aren't necessarily, an evil thing, a bad thing. Thoughts on that?
I think, Marianne, this actually brings us back to what Adrian said. Technology can support people with certain tasks, with automation, with automating like standard tasks, with processing information at scale, but it will, at least not yet, it does not replace the people that are making the decision. And we have all sorts of flags that we check for, but a human, a person is the one who analyzes the results of those checks. And it's important for them to have all the information in one place to be able to easily make the decision. And this is what technology can help with. But in the end, it is the decision of the people that says, okay, this author has retracted papers, but this retraction happened 20 years ago. They've had a great reputation ever since, and the reason for retraction was this, and maybe the author themselves was the one who announced the issue, right? And was frank about it. So, okay, I decide that this moves forward. What we found helps is providing the investigators mechanism to actually flag, for example, false positives, right? And say, and overwrite these false positives. So the check is saying that this is a problem, but I reviewed this carefully. I've made my decision. I am bypassing the result of, I'm overwriting the result of this check because of this reason, which is an informed decision. So technology is not ready to replace the people. And to the question earlier, to the point earlier around what do we see publishers, how do we see publishers reacting? I think we see them reacting in two areas. On one hand, we see the research integrity teams increasing, getting stuffed more and more with the volumes. On the other hand, we see them trying to look for automated tools that can help optimize the assessment process. And again, I insist, helps optimize.
I mean, the human process is an expensive one. I mean, so what percentage of papers that have these signal? What percent of papers actually get to an investigation point or have enough signals that warrant investigation? Is that 10% of the papers, 20% of papers, or is it 1% of the papers? I mean,
well, on the published literature, there was an article in Nature that estimated there was about 2% of the published literature. Now that's not all the submissions and things. So, but maybe to go on to just answer Marianne's question that came in. If that, I sense, there's been a number of high-profile cases, Harvard, where the dean resigned because they didn't either cite other work or they claimed it as their own, and these things happened a long time ago. I do think for things like the image manipulation checks, there should be a sort of statute of limitation of how far do you go back? When did technology change, and that sort of version of record where there may be reasons why something was wrong that was different to just pure fraud. But I think as an organization, it would be great if, there are forums like the World Research Integrity Congress where all these sort of like-minded people from institutions and publishers do come together to talk. And I think that's just going to help. I'd love to see publishers playing a more active role, educating and working with institutions and all our partners, and bringing the communities together to really kind of digest and understand and set a course forwards. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good place to stop. We have come to the top of the hour. I'd like to thank everyone for attending this webinar, taking time out of your day. Thank you so much, Mark, Madalena, and Adrian, for having this conversation with us. The DCL Learning Series comprises webinars like this, a monthly newsletter, and our blog. You can access many other webinars related to content structure, XML standards, scholarly publishing, and more from the on-demand webinar section of our website at dataconversionlaboratory.com. We hope to see you at future webinars, and have a great day. This does conclude today's broadcast.
I thank you, Madalena and Adrian. This is great, and thank you everybody who's in the audience. Okay.
Thank you,
we'll
everyone.
call that a wrap. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.